Hey there, senior leader, and welcome to the Talent Sherpa podcast. This is where senior leaders come to rethink how human capital really works. I'm your host, Jackson Lynch, and today I'm joined by my co-host, friend, mentor, and fellow barber, money saver, and the founder of Propulsion AI, Scott Morris. Scott, I want to kick us off today with a very dangerous question. Are company values corporate poetry? Those words that are painted on the lobby that sound so nice but have like zero impact on who gets promoted. I once worked someplace that claimed to value collaboration, and yet the guy who got promoted hoarded information like it was a state secret.
I know that guy, the guy who wins the teamwork award and then locks his spreadsheet.
Exactly. So today we're going to ask the question, do values actually matter? Or are they the business world's version of participation trophies? And here's a spoiler alert. If you are treating them as posters, you're listening to the wrong podcast. It's okay to leave now.
Jackson, as usual, before we start on this topic, let me ask, if you like the pod, if you enjoy the content that we put out, please do us a favor right now and subscribe. Leave us a comment or drop us a quick review on your preferred platform. It's how we grow this pod, how we keep the content relevant and broadly shared with senior leaders.
Thanks, Scott. And let's start with the big picture. Culture drives performance. It always has. It always will. But most executives confuse culture with mood. And they hear words and picture ping pong tables and free snacks and feel-good slogans. And in reality, culture is the operating system of the business, and it determines how decisions get made when no one's watching. There's a saying, culture eats strategy for breakfast. I think it was on the HBR years and years and years ago. I don't know if that's true. The truth is, the culture doesn't eat strategy, but it does digest it. Strategy is what you plan to do. Culture is how you actually behave. And if the two of those are not aligned, then I think performance collapses.
So Jackson, look at Microsoft as a decent example. Satya Nadella rebuilt the company's foundation from the ground up around a growth mindset. And he changed the way meetings were held and meeting culture and the way that talent got reviewed and managers' expectations. And that strategy worked because he shifted the culture of the organization. You know, you and I have talked before. We've done a couple of episodes on culture. It's not a vibe. It is a system of values and beliefs and behaviors and experiences that determine how fast an organization can move and how aligned it can stay under pressure. And if you want to make the case, I think, to a skeptical CEO, it's really simple. Strong cultures compound execution speed. Weak ones multiply friction. Revenue per employee, speed to impact, retention of top talent. You can trace all of those back to cultural clarity, expectations of how you are supposed to behave.
Like I've said this more times than I can count. Audit your last 100 decisions and you have your culture. The values on the wall that you don't see on the floor in the conference room, they don't actually mean all that much because like we've talked about, culture is a business performance lever. It's not an HR initiative. But here's what I don't understand, and I'm going to be super vulnerable and pragmatic here. I don't understand what the values are relative to the culture and how they translate into behaviors. Thankfully, joining us today is Ann Melinger. She's the CEO and owner of Bink, and that's an agency dedicated to designing meaningful employee experience. She has more than 20 years of experience in culture, communications, engagement. She helps organizations translate their values into everyday behavior that fuels performance. And I've even heard that she's been known as a passionate advocate for purposeful workplaces. And she and her team, they partner with global brands to build cultures where people feel connected, inspired, and empowered to do their best work. So enough about the commercial. I just need some help from you, Ann, on how to help a pragmatic dude like me figure out this whole chicken the egg thing out. I just don't understand. Thank you for joining us.
Absolutely. I'm excited to get into it. Very excited.
Let's start the discussions with some clarity. Most executives assume, or at least some of them do, that once values are published, they're real. I would argue the minute that they end up colliding with business pressure, That's the moment of truth when you find out what's really there. So if values are written down, doesn't make them real.
It's absolutely right. I mean, there's a saying, right, that people's true character shows up under pressure, right? Someone might say, "I'm kind, I'm thoughtful, I'm generous," but then as soon as you put them in a really tough situation, that's when their true character shows up. And that's the same is true with values, right? Having values written down makes them visible. It definitely does not make them real. What makes them real is when they influence decisions. I completely agree with your statement about auditing your decisions, and especially when it's an inconvenient decision or a costly decision. As a business owner myself, I get faced with that all the time. There may be a company that wants to hire me and give me their money, but maybe they behave in ways that are not aligned with my company's values. And I could sure take their money. It's green. It's going to fill up my bank account. But if I am true to my values, then I have to be willing to stand up and say no. And if you can say no to something that's profitable because it violates what you stand for, that means your values are real.
I actually lived through that when I was in the middle of renegotiating a contract with a client about 8 years ago, and the owner and some of the colleagues showed up on the front page of the Wall Street Journal.
There
And
you
so
go.
I joked about that for years, but when you actually see them on the Wall Street Journal, it's time that maybe you don't need that as a customer.
Exactly. Exactly.
A lot of organizations use values because they're aspirational.
Mhm.
Should they be?
I always say that they should be 80% realistic and maybe 20% aspirational. Values really do need to be anchored and aspirational. They need to be anchored in what's already true about how the organization behaves at its best. But it is valuable for them to be a bit aspirational because you always want to be pushing yourself toward a higher standard, right? So it's a real art of getting that balance right. If they're purely aspirational, then that's marketing. And that you can just cue the eye roll from your employees, right? They're going to feel like this is totally disconnected from my reality. It's too aspirational. But if they're purely grounded in what's happening today, then they're not going to challenge you to grow. So it's important to strike that balance between anchored and aspirational.
But a challenge that I have with that is always the fact that we all tend to aspire to different things. And that creates some natural friction.
Absolutely. And I think that's why it's so important when you are developing values to really push on leaders. Values do need to be grounded in what's there today, but you need to start at the very top of the organization and find out from leaders, what do we truly aspire to be? And we need to get aligned on what that aspiration looks like so that it's coming through in our values. Alignment among leadership is really the thing that's going to make or break this whole process of creating values for an organization.
And let me double click on the art form that you mentioned. The way that I've always thought about it is there is a gap between values and culture. Values the intent, culture is the proof. And as you're doing your design work, the difference between them is your trust deficit. And depending on where you are in the business and life cycle and history and all that stuff, like different companies can have a different level of trust deficit, but you need to know that there is one. So
Mhm.
that then I guess leads into a question, and I'd love your thoughts on, do values sit outside of business choices? Because I've heard some people say that they do.
They absolutely can't. They have to sit at the center of business choices. Again, otherwise they're just wallpaper. If the companies are treating them as something separate, something that's there to just simply protect them from business reality, then they sort of have lost the point. Every strategic decision that you make is a signal about your culture, whether or not you do layoffs, who you're laying off, how you're communicating those layoffs, who you're promoting, why you're promoting them, who you're partnering with. All of those decisions are your values in action. So I believe values have to sit right at the center of business choices.
So how do the pieces then work together? We're gonna dive deep into several of these, but in the last, I don't know, 5 minutes, we've talked about culture, we've talked about behaviors, we've talked about values. How did those and potentially other elements work together?
The way we talk about it at Bink is I like to call it a compass model. To me, the culture is the compass. I like to think of that because I often think visually about those little tiny like metal balls, that you see inside things. And if you pour a bunch out on a table, they're just flying everywhere. And if you run a magnet over them, they all line up together. That magnet, that's your culture. That's like getting people aligned. They're going in the same direction. That's the power of it. And so when I think about culture, we think about it as a compass with 4 points. The things that make up culture are values. That's the North Star. Absolutely. Behaviors, which are the values in action. Beliefs, that's really the foundation, your mission, your vision. What are we all about? Why do we exist? And then the experiences, the things that people experience day in and day out within your organization. Those things together create culture. You can't take one without the other. Values are the most important, though. They sit at the North Star. They're really what underlie everything because they really define what you stand for. They're what makes you tick. They're the heart and soul of your identity. The values are the most important thing, but you can't define culture without looking at those other points.
Let me drill down on just one of those pieces that's unclear to me, and that's experiences. Is that a byproduct of the other three working together, or is experiences something completely different than that?
No, it's definitely connected, and it's how the culture is actually felt by your people. So in some ways, that's the formal things, right? It's what happens when I come in for an interview? What happens when I start on day one? Who's welcoming me? Do I have a computer? That's my experience, right? What's happening at the end of year reviews? Those are all the systems and the policies, but also experiences of how does my manager treat me? What's it like when I have an interaction with my manager? Are they distracted? Are they multitasking? Or are they looking at me? Are they listening to me? Those experiences, but they aren't in a vacuum. They're all connected. All of these things are interconnected. But the thing that you can experience is like cultural dissonance when we're saying something about our values, our beliefs, but you're experiencing something totally different. That's when things really start to break down. The four all have to be working in harmony.
So I'm not going to spend the pod and push back on the model because you're the expert. I'm not, but I kind of think I'm probably where Scott is on that. In that the experiences are the output. They're not one of the other three. And to the degree that you have behaviors, and well, maybe the way of thinking about it is the you have behaviors, values, culture, and then reality.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the difference between the first three and the fourth is what drives the experience for other folks. But let me move on because it doesn't matter. I want to try to get below the language of values a little bit and really focusing on the operational truth for the record. So if we were to think about the values of a North Star, and then we place them in real world situations.
Mm-hmm.
I've never worked in a company that didn't have values on paper. Most of them put them on the wall. Why do the same people break them all the time without consequence?
It's pretty simple, and it's because most organizations don't take the time to connect values to consequence. Brene Brown, who I happen to love and I follow a lot of her work, she says, and she works with thousands of companies on values. She says that only about 10% of companies that she has seen actually take the time to translate values to behaviors. In my experience, it's maybe just a bit more than that, but not much. But even fewer actually go the next step, which is to take behaviors to actual reward and consequence. Meaning, have we defined competencies? Are we actually promoting people based on these behaviors? Are we actually penalizing people based on these behaviors? If only 10% are actually going to the step of doing behaviors, of that 10%, what percent are actually doing rewards and consequences? So few. It's so rare. And it's not a hard thing to do. I don't think it's all that difficult. I think it just actually takes the intention to do it and to make it real.
And, I work in a manufacturing company, and one of the CEO's top priorities was we have to establish a set of values that drive this business. Now, he also parenthetically would mutter the revenue of this business, but drive the business was the corporate line. And we did an exercise. And then I, of course, because I'm a strong believer in behaviors, pushed for the behavior transformation. And it was at that point that I knew I had my work cut out for me, because they were exhausted from the process of defining the values. You work with a lot of CEOs day in, day out, month in, month out. Are there telltale signs that you see? Are there patterns that you see of CEOs who are willing to do what the real hard work is, which is push beyond the initial exercise?
Honestly, the great thing about being an outside consultant, and why I've done it for the vast majority of my career, is that typically they're not going to pay for me or hire me until they're ready to make that commitment. So in general, by bringing us in, they are more or less on board to making that commitment. But, again, to go back to Brene Brown, she just recently came out with a new book. It's called Strong Ground, and it's all about bravery. And the fact that this requires real bravery, we don't talk about it enough, but a leader has to be willing to sit down. And yes, it's actually easy to define what does this value look like in practice. What's a little harder is defining what does it look like when we're out of alignment with our values. What behaviors would we see if we are acting out of these alignment with these values? And what are we going to do about it when it happens? That's where the real bravery comes. And not a lot of leaders are willing to do it. I hope through reading books like Brene Brown and listening to podcasts like this, that more leaders are going to be brave and be willing to step up to make those hard choices.
Yeah, I go all the way back to the old career architect cards. If you guys remember that, there were 63, 69 different competencies. One of them was managerial courage, and
Mm-hmm.
and now, unfortunately for me, that was an overused skill because I was just dumb. I didn't know what fights to fight and which ones to say not today. It's fine. But we've actually, in the cultures that we're creating, especially over the last several years, I think not only do we step away from the managerial courage that we used to say and lift up as being important in leadership capability, but we've actually created incentives that would suggest you shouldn't. And that's a problem, I think, and it's a problem that's going to have longer term implications to it, and one that as the CHROs who are listening to this pod, like, we got to work on this together, because at the end of the day, the culture that you say you have competes with your incentives that you've created, and when those match, those are great. When they're not, like, the posters are props. If I were Scott, I would have used the Oldsmobile horn, but I was able to manage my language, so I would like some positive.
I get beeped on this pod every once in a while.
Which, if you actually
Sure, I
talk
will
to us in
too.
real life, the fact that I'm not the one getting beeped is pretty spectacular. Scott, do you have any questions for us?
I do. And it comes back to Brene Brown's work. And because the other thing that she talks about in Strong Ground is the value of authenticity. And so often, I think when we get involved in the values exercises, they are performative. And it's corporate. It's not corporate poetry, Jackson. It's corporate fiction, because they want, the senior executives want words that make them feel good about the company that they lead, but that lands so hollow with every single person that's on the front line. And I think the simple question I have is steering around that. What techniques have you found to be most effective? Because it's a natural tendency, I think.
It's a really natural tendency. And I always go back to research. Again, like Brene Brown, going to as much research and data as you can is typically what will get executives thinking differently. There was a study that was done by MIT that looked at the most common values that companies use. Number one was integrity. Like, some
Enron.
huge number of companies, right? Enron had it as one of their values. So huge number of companies have integrity, collaboration, the same freaking words over and over. And to your point, they're hollow, they're meaningless, you don't understand what they mean. So one of the things that we try to do whenever we're working with executives to refresh or create new company values is we take some time to really educate you on what do we mean by core values. We don't mean, there are other kinds of values out there. There are permission to play values. Permission to play values are like, you can't even walk in the door unless you have integrity. It's so basic. I don't need to say it. I don't need to list it. It's in my code of conduct. Don't punch your neighbor. Don't steal from the business. Those things are just basic permission to play. They're not core to who we are. They're not necessarily what makes us different. They're very basic. You want to make sure that right away leaders understand, you know what, those things don't have to be in your core values. They can live somewhere. Again, they can live in your code of conduct. They can live in your, onboarding materials, but they're not your core values. So let's really hone in on what do we mean by core values? Let's weed out some of the other things. Let's choose words that actually feel like they fit us, like they are authentic to us. We'll go through exercises where we'll show a list of 3 core values. Can you name what company this came from? And 9 times out of 10, of course, they can't. But sometimes when you look at some companies like Asana, for example, their core values are very much theirs. You could not put any other company name on them. And so that's what you want to aspire to. So really taking time to educate on what are truly core values. How do you avoid the pitfalls that most companies fall into? That's where you can really get executives excited and thinking a little differently about how to approach this work.
Like, I'm going to push back on that, because if I did not see integrity or accountability on a poster, I would have no idea that it was important. That's a joke for all those who are listening to the podcast.
For anybody who's not watching us on YouTube, it's
like,
you're smiling faces.
Yeah, you're exactly right. We need a sarcasm font.
But not the horn.
Not the horn. Stay away from the horn. It is theater, though, because to your point, I might even argue that is not even a value; it's a behavior, and there are permission to play situations. But let's maybe pull back just a little bit to we started going down a path, and Scott brought us down a whole different path. So I'd like to bring us back to the path to begin with. Like, if you have a situation where you have a top performer who is delivering something the business desperately needs in a way that, whether it's your values or behavior, is antithetical over the long term, but boy, it feels good in the short term, and they get rewarded, like, doesn't that just invalidate all the like, how do we manage through that cognitive dissonance? And if I'm a CHRO listening to this, like, what do I do about it? Because I guarantee we've all seen it every day. What do we do?
Absolutely. And this is where it comes back to the bravery. You've got to call it out. When you see it, you have to call it out. You have to acknowledge that it's happening, and you have to question, are we willing to do something about it? Because if not, then that's not a core value. If you're saying collaboration is a core value and our top performer is constantly locking down his spreadsheets, then it's not a core value. And I think this is where the bravery comes in. This is where the willingness to push back, to be able to go to that business leader and say, hey, you have this performer. They're not in alignment with our core values. What are we going to do about it?
So, Ann, do you do work up front then with CEOs, with executive teams on that concept? Because at the moment that you call that out and there isn't a consequence, it's the whole exercise is dead as far as I'm concerned. You can't get back what you just lost in front of your company.
It's true. It is true. Interestingly, to offer a counterpoint to that, though, one of the things also that Brene Brown talks about in her book is that moving people to change, you actually only need about 20% of people to get on board. So if you do have pockets of outliers, people who are behaving outside of alignment, that might not necessarily knock down the whole house of cards. I'm a big believer in progress over perfection. So I wouldn't let that necessarily derail the whole thing. I think it's a question of how frequently is it happening? Where is it happening? How much is it showing up? And then determine whether or not you can actually move forward with that or not.
So I guess for me, the real question here isn't whether your values sound inspiring, because of course they will. It's whether they cost anything to live by it. And if they've never forced a trade off, it's branding, right? It's not a belief. It's
Exactly.
not something that will. It's not the North Star that you talked about at the beginning. So let's move next to maybe how we talk about operationalizing the cost and how to wire enforcement and feedback and consequence into the system so that cultures can actually scale, which by the way, especially as you have businesses that are growing rapidly, that becomes even more important to do it. So many CHROs struggle, I think, to keep company values alive beyond the posters and the decks, especially like I'm working with a company that is just growing. And I worked for a company that was doing the same thing. And it's really hard to keep things in connection because at some point, everyone that is communicating your values just got there too. So how from your experience do you guide organizations through that kind of a cultural change? And what I'm really poking at is what are practical ways to ensure those values come up in your kind of daily behaviors and business decisions?
Absolutely. I think the number one thing, the most compelling and impactful thing that you can do is train your managers. I often say that managers are the carriers of culture, they're the keepers of culture, they're also the destroyers of culture. And so taking time to make sure that your managers really understand what the values mean, what they look like in practice, what they look like when you're living out of alignment, whether that's delivered through training, through tools and resources that you're giving them. I was just talking to a client earlier today about the fact that we want to make sure that we're equipping managers with things that they can both use to talk about values in a formal way, but also to make sure that they're using the values in the way that they're assessing and giving feedback to their people. So that empowerment of managers is super important, especially as a company scales, because you're right. Any new manager coming in the door or any manager that you've promoted from an individual contributor to a manager, they're bringing lots of baggage. And so you want to make sure that you're clearing that out and giving them a lot of clarity around what you want them to do going forward.
Is that something that as you're interviewing and trying to figure out who to put in these roles you can select for? And if so, how do you do that? It seems like that would be really important.
Absolutely. And there's a lot of research out there around how to frame questions, interview questions to look for things like culture add, giving those kinds of questions around how have you handled XYZ? How have you, when was the last time you brought a new idea to your company and how was it implemented? Things like that, where you're looking for that culture add when you're actually interviewing people for sure.
So I find myself challenged by this, and you don't. I know you listen, and we're thankful that you're also a listener to the pod. But anybody who has heard more than one or two episodes knows that I'm a little like Jackson and I are pretty much in the middle together. I'm a little bit more on the idealistic side, and Jackson's a little bit more on the practical side. But on this subject, I have to tell you, I swing way over the practicality, and my idealism just goes out the door because I do not believe in the values stuff. The order seems wrong to me. Behaviors drive everything, and they can't be randomized behaviors. They've got to be behaviors that are actually driving the business, because as we do a bunch of episodes on this, we're not doing this because it's some kind of HR pet project. We're doing it to enhance business performance. And when I say doing it, defining culture, specifying values, defining behaviors, etc. But I just think we get the order wrong. We focus on values, we try and decompose them into behaviors rather than understanding the behaviors that drive the business and then filtering it up. I am happy to be told I'm crazy, but I feel so strongly about that because it just adds a layer of practicality. I can't interview to be, if you're honest or not. I can't interview around that, but I can interview around a behavior which is, will you speak truth to power? Tell me a time that you've actually done that. I can build a behavioral interview process around that. Am I crazy?
I wish I could tell you you were, and you may be about other things, but on this topic, you're not crazy. And in fact, when we do the work with companies to help them define their values, we do often start with behaviors. We actually do storytelling exercises where we'll say, tell us about a superstar. Tell us an example, a story of something they did. Tell us a problem that existed. How did they address it? And give us those stories. And we actually carry them through these stories. How did they change the outcome? And that we can then back into values. So you're not crazy. We often do actually start with stories, behaviors, outcomes, and back into the values.
So then how do you, the thing that I do like, if I'm going to try and put on a fair hat about this thing, I like the values posters in the sense that they are visual reminders of something. But what are you being reminded of? It's not the noun. It's the verb that you've got to be reminded of, because that's what's driving everything. So once you've done the storytelling, once you've done the behaviors, what's your process for turning that into the nouns that then maybe hang on the wall?
Absolutely. And I do think it has to be both. My background is in communications. I came to this work through communication. So I believe in the power of communicating with people, of sharing words, the power of words to change behavior. So it's both. You do need to say the words. At my company, we have 3 core values. People know what they are because they're on our website. They're printed on different things, but they also know them because they live in our systems, in our reward system, in our performance management system, in the way that we promote people. We have to explain you're being promoted because you live the values through these behaviors. So it is both. You do need to show, you do need to have memorable words and phrases with graphics that help them actually stick. You do need to use adult learning theory to actually make the words memorable and stick. And they have to be incorporated into the systems, into the rewards, into the incentives and things like that. It's both.
I had one exercise on values and behaviors that I think I did better than I've done it anywhere, and it was at Georgia Tech when I was CHRO there. I made pocket cards that had our mission and our valued behaviors on it, and I asked everybody to carry those. And what I further asked is, if you ever see me violating these, pull your card out and tell me the one you think I violated. And I tried to do that because I wanted my frontline leaders to do it. We took it a step further and we sought volunteers who felt particularly connected to one of the behaviors. We put them on the poster with why that behavior was important to them and how they tried to practice it. Probably the most successful visualization exercise I've ever done.
I love that. And storytelling is really powerful. We're humans. We love stories. We love seeing stories about ourselves and our colleagues. One of the most simple and timeless tactics around this is have a storytelling campaign on your intranet where you're celebrating specific examples of people and teams living in the values. Super basic. It never gets old. It works because storytelling is compelling to humans, period.
So let me tell a story of my time back in Nestle DST. And we had a group that came in and we did a lot of mission, vision, values work. But more important than that, we figured out what is our signature strength, that thing that as a business, we needed to be better than anyone else to win in the marketplace. And after we looked at all sorts of fun, sexy words, we came up with reliability, which is like stale bread in terms of excitement level. And yet we had a guy, and we were up in the Midwest. This is a nationwide company. We were up in the Midwest, and this guy had 26 stops on his route, and and so he's a 10-hour day. He's doing a lot of product, ice cream, frozen pizzas, all the good stuff, good healthy food, and he gets to the very first place, and his truck breaks down. That's a 24-foot box truck that's refrigerated. So that thing's not going to move anywhere. It's hard to even tow. And so he calls into the dispatch. Dispatch sends out the tow truck. Tow truck shows up. And he has the tow truck take him to the next 25 stops on his route.
There you go.
We turned that into the biggest story time because it was true. And when everyone says, what is reliability? We said, that is reliability. And that's why he and his entire family joined us at Disneyland. And they got to go through Great California Adventure Park all by themselves for the evening. Like, and the son, who I remember quite distinctly, he went on like Tower of Terror like 94 straight times. And it was like, but it reinforced something that nothing else could do. And I don't want to pull one other thread that you shared, Ann, because I think it's really, really cool. do you define your heroes? At
Mhm.
Frito-Lay, we defined our hero as Herman Lay. He was a guy that was selling potato chips, selling Fritos out of the back of his truck. Everyone knew the story about Herman Lay. At Nestle DSD, everyone knew the story about the guy that pulled the tow truck. If you have that level of story, even when they are still there, like having a hero that everybody likes is a big deal.
Absolutely.
So just reinforcing. I don't know a great way to pull everything together, but like that storytelling is something that we miss because people don't go for the buzzwords. They go for something that they have a meaningful connection to. And oh my God, I've
Absolutely.
just realized that this is freaky Tuesday or whatever day this thing's coming out because I am now Scott and Scott is now me. I just went full idealistic and you went full pragmatic. Like what the hell's going on here?
I love it.
Okay,
I love it.
so let's bring it back to pragmatic. If you're a CHRO that's listening here, that's accountable for engagement and performance, uh, they are almost always going to be asked for how do I prove the ROI of culture and the storytelling work that we just talked about, based upon what you've done in your research and client experience, and probably Brene Brown's book. Like, what are the data points that can best demonstrate that the strategy is driving outcomes?
Well, you said it at the very top of the episode, culture drives performance. And I believe that that is the ultimate goal we're striving for here, right? We're striving for business results. Now, that said, it is challenging to tie the things that we do from a culture perspective to business results. So the thing that I often say you need to really look at is alignment. Measuring alignment and understanding of the strategy and how I support it and how I deliver against it every day. That to me is the number one metric of success around your culture. And that is something that you can measure through pulse surveys, through focus groups, through interviews and conversations. Looking at, do employees understand who we are, where we're going, and how their day-to-day decisions bring us forward on that path? That alignment is crucial. That's the number one thing to look at. There are other things to look at as well. Things like manager effectiveness, asking employees about their managers and whether or not they're living in alignment with those values is super important. And I think doing some of that behavioral consistency testing. Jackson, I love your rule of, look at your audit your last 100 decisions and look at the consistency. That's something that you don't need a huge survey tool to do, but to actually look at what are the decisions that we're making and are they living in alignment with the values that we have and the culture that we strive for?
So let's make that twist now and talk about the talent triple playbook. We usually, Ann, on the pod at this stage, we talk about moves that you can make this upcoming Monday that will make a difference. So Scott, why don't you kick off and Ann jump in as you see fit.
Yeah, I mean, I think number one for me on making it practical is run a do-say audit, because that then becomes the basis for defining the behaviors. It becomes the basis for changing the behaviors that you don't want into ones that you do.
I always say pick one business process that you can look at. Start with one. Maybe it's your performance reviews. Maybe it's your promotion criteria. Maybe it's the wording you use in your job descriptions. Pick one process and explicitly map where your values show up.
I love that. And I would say you should define failure behaviors. Think about your top couple values. Pick ones that are really important in what you're doing in the business. Describe what good looks like when things go wrong, and then talk about that. So
Can I add one? My dog's trying to add one. I'm going to add one more. And that sound was not me. That is the dog, if you're just listening. You got to model it. And I think the thing that I'm curious about how you do this, because I know you do it. I counsel managers all the time. You have to not only model the behavior, you have to be out in public that you are doing the behavior. You've got to say it. Like, this is critical to our business, and that's why I'm doing it. Is words that have got to come out of your mouth, not just doing the behavior where it can be either misinterpreted for something else or unseen.
Absolutely. That intentionality is so crucial. And that goes back to why we have to make sure we're equipping managers to do that, not only to be able to demonstrate the behaviors. And that's where the training and the practice and getting those reps in is so important, but also then giving them the words and the language to explain it. So it is both being able to walk the walk and talk the talk.
Like, I think these are great Monday morning ideas, but now we're going to move on to the summary, or as Scott always says, values are like hotel waffles. They look great in the picture, but they need heat and pressure to actually hold together,
I have never actually said that.
which is what makes this so funny.
You're ready for me to do the summary, aren't you?
Yeah, any time. Take your time. It's all good.
All right, sorry. Here it goes. Culture isn't mood. It's an operating system that determines the speed, trust, and ultimately the performance of the business. Number 2, values matter, but only when they shape consequences and not when they're just decorations. 3, behaviors are the contract that turn those words into proof. If you can't measure it, if you can't touch it, if it's not a verb, then you're not going to be able to manage it or direct it. And 4th, culture reveals itself when things go wrong. You've got to look at the decisions you're making. You've got to look at why you're making them. They've got to be more than slogans. That's where the truth lives, is in action. How'd I do?
I think that's terrific. I think there's a takeaway point on the gap between what you say and what you do, and that trust gap as it relates to aspirational values is really, really important. You got to be thoughtful about how wide that gap can live in the world that you're in today. And it's different for different companies at different stages of their life cycle. And anything you wanted to add to the list?
No, I completely agree with you on the gap between aspiration and reality. And it is often very difficult to see that from inside the bottle, as we say. That's where a third party consultant and advisor can be really helpful to actually look from the outside, read the label to you. Here's what it says as an outside perspective looking in. And let's measure that gap between aspiration and reality and make sure that it's finding that right balance. 80-20 is what we try to aim for. It's different in every organization.
So here's the big takeaway for me. If your strategy is the map, then culture is the terrain and execution speed is the weather, and you should plan accordingly.
I'm not sure I actually know what that means.
me neither, but it sounded impressive, and I said it in a very declarative voice, and that's what matters. So I just want to thank everyone for tuning into the Talent Sherpa podcast today. This is, as you know, where senior leaders come to rethink how human capital really works. And this is so much fun to do with all of you. And thanks, Ann, who listened to the podcast and asked us to join. We absolutely loved having you. And why don't you tell us a little bit more about where people can find out about Bink?
Absolutely. You can visit us at thinkbink.com. So it's think Bink, BINK.com/podcast. And there you'll find everything from our newsletter to resources on the topic of values. This has been a great discussion. I'm a loyal listener and I really appreciate you having me on.
We're happy that you're here. We'll do a quick shout out to one of our favorite listeners, Julius from Jacksonville. Thank you so very much for listening, for being a part of the podcast. I said it at the top of the episode. I'll say it again. If you enjoyed the content from the episode today, do us a favor right now, hit the like button or subscribe to the pod so that you get content delivered to you. Leave us a review on whatever your favorite platform is, whether that's Apple Podcasts or Spotify, even YouTube. If you want to see now what the three of us look like, we are ubiquitous there. Here's our challenge. We are trying to build to 1,000 subscribers by the end of the year. We need your help getting there. It's free. It would be really helpful.
Look, and if you're a CHRO wondering where to start your AI journey because your CEO is saying you need to start your AI journey, please don't forget to check out Propulsion AI. That is at the cleverly titled getpropulsion.ai. They're building a team of AI teammates who can help human capital leaders focus on what really matters to the business.
And if you are a CHRO who's ready to accelerate your impact, you need to go right now to www.mytalentsherpa.com. Jackson has curated a set of resources that are going to help you navigate, elevate, and deliver results from day one. You can even sign up for the best-selling Talent Sherpa Weekly Substack. You can do it there, or you can do it at talentsherpa.substack.com.
And thank you, Ann. Thank you, Scott. And thank you to everyone who is listening. Until next time, keep raising the bar. Keep aligning values, behaviors, and consequences, and keep on climbing.